Hello everyone. Welcome to Mr. Bean Family Stories channel. This is where we bring you interesting, funny, and inspiring stories from Mr. Bean family every day. You will meet me, Mr. Bean's son, someone you may be familiar with and I hope you love, my dad with his surprising and meaningful stories, and my lovely sister who always brings positive energy with stories close to life. Every day, one of us will share new stories, interesting journeys, and today it's my turn. I will take you on an exciting adventure, but also profound lessons about life. Today's story carries a simple but important message. Never judge something by its appearance. Behind that appearance, there are always surprises waiting for us. If you like our family dynamic, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our stories on this amazing journey. Share this video with your friends, family, and loved ones, and don't forget to leave some interesting comments to let me know what you think. Now, let's dive into today's story and dive into the world of surprises. Let's get started. Emily Harrison sat at her small desk, the faint hum of the city outside barely reaching her ears, as she adjusted the settings on her laptop. The early morning light filtered through the window, casting a soft glow across the room. But Emily was focused entirely on the task before her. 3 years of meticulous planning had led to this moment. The invisibility project was about to take shape, and Emily was ready to begin the next phase of her social experiment. She glanced at the whiteboard on the wall across from her. It was covered with notes, timelines, and images, photos of hotel lobbies, staff uniforms, guests of varying social statuses, and articles highlighting discrimination in hospitality. This was her world now, a world where appearance dictated treatment, and where the invisible class, like the housekeeping staff, were often overlooked despite their essential roles. The evidence she had gathered over the years was undeniable, and it was time to expose it. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "You have to prove yourself more than others, Emily. No one will notice you unless you make them." It was a lesson Emily had learned well. Her mother had spent decades cleaning hotel rooms, never once acknowledged by the guests who came and went. To Emily, her mother's sacrifice was a constant reminder of the inequality that lay at the heart of the hospitality industry. And now it was her turn to make a difference. As Emily began typing the opening lines of her project proposal, she could feel the weight of her mission settling in. This was not just about creating a documentary. It was about dismantling an entire system of exclusion, about showing the world how appearance could determine who was seen and who was invisible. The idea had come to her years ago, but it wasn't until she watched her mother return home exhausted from a long shift that the drive to expose the truth became undeniable. Her plan was simple, but ambitious. She would infiltrate luxury hotels across the city, posing as a potential guest. Her goal? To document how staff members treated her based solely on her appearance. It wasn't about being rejected for her lack of wealth or status, but about being turned away simply because she didn't look the part. Emily took a deep breath and hit send on the final draft of her project outline. This would be the first step in a journey that would uncover the hidden biases entrenched within the luxury hospitality industry. It would not be easy, but she knew the importance of what she was about to do. Her first hotel, the luxurious Carlton Hotel, would serve as the testing ground. After all, the first rejection would be the hardest, but it would also be the beginning of something far bigger. Her phone buzzed, breaking her concentration. She looked at the screen. It was a message from Marcus, her trusted producer. "We're ready. The team is in position. Are you sure about this?" Emily smiled slightly. She had been preparing for this moment for months. Her answer was clear. "Yes, it's time." Later that afternoon, Emily stood in front of her bathroom mirror, adjusting her simple gray sweater and light-wash jeans. The outfit was carefully chosen, neither too flashy nor too casual, designed to blend in and go unnoticed. An unassuming disguise for the mission ahead. As she checked her reflection one last time, she felt a twinge of doubt, but quickly pushed it aside. This wasn't about her. It was about something much larger than herself. It was about revealing how people like her, people who didn't conform to the ideal of wealth or status, were treated as invisible by the very system they helped uphold. She grabbed her small bag, slipping in her hidden camera, disguised as a brooch, and made sure her voice recorder was set to capture everything. Emily wasn't just documenting a social experiment. She was uncovering a truth that would challenge the status quo. This was phase 1, the beginning of her investigation. As she stepped into the hallway of her apartment building, the noise of New York City swirled around her. The city had always been full of contrasts. The lavish penthouses standing next to dilapidated apartment blocks, the well-dressed executives brushing past the homeless on the street. Emily had always observed this divide. But it wasn't until she started working on her project that she realized just how deep these invisible lines ran. How something as simple as a person's appearance could close doors, limit opportunities, and erase their worth in the eyes of the powerful. The first hotel on her list was the Excelsior, an iconic establishment known for its opulence and exclusivity. Emily had researched the hotel's policies, the reviews, and the press releases. Every detail mattered. As she exited the building and hailed a taxi, she reflected on the scope of what she was about to do. For the past 3 years, her life had revolved around collecting data, speaking with industry professionals, and witnessing firsthand the subtle forms of discrimination that plagued the hospitality world. But tonight, it was no longer about research or interviews. It was about action. She had made it clear from the beginning that she wouldn't just sit behind a camera and observe. She would force the system to confront itself. By the time Emily arrived at the Excelsior, the sun had started to dip below the skyline, casting the city in the warm, golden hues of late afternoon. She paid the taxi fare, adjusted the strap of her bag, and walked towards the entrance. The lobby gleamed with marble floors and crystal chandeliers. The scent of luxury was unmistakable, yet Emily felt no awe. Instead, she felt a growing sense of resolve. Inside, the staff moved with practiced precision. Doormen opening the door for arriving guests, receptionists greeting them with rehearsed smiles, all serving a select clientele that had been deemed worthy by the hotel's standards. Emily took a moment to observe, noting the subtle glances and gestures that indicated who belonged and who didn't. A slight shift in posture when a guest with an expensive suit approached, a softening of eyes when someone in designer clothes entered. It was all part of the silent code that governed these spaces. She approached the reception desk, where a young woman stood behind the counter. Her name tag read, Melissa Winters. Melissa's smile seemed to falter just slightly as Emily approached. She couldn't help but notice the contrast between Emily's simple attire and the polished look of the guests surrounding her. "Good evening," Emily said, her voice steady, friendly, and confident. She reached into her bag, pulling out her platinum credit card and sliding it across the counter. "I'd like to book your finest available suite, please." Melissa paused, her eyes scanning Emily's outfit, before briefly glancing at the card. Her smile tightened, her professional demeanor slipping for just a fraction of a second. "Do you have a reservation?" she asked, a hint of condescension in her tone. "No, but I checked your website just 20 minutes ago. You have 3 suites available," Emily replied, her tone even but firm. Melissa's expression shifted, and she hesitated before responding. "I'm afraid we're fully booked tonight." She glanced down at the credit card, her fingers hovering above it but not touching it. Emily smiled back, masking her growing frustration. She'd seen this before. The same response. The same excuses. "That's interesting," she said, keeping her voice calm. "Your website showed real-time availability for all 3 suites." Melissa's eyes flickered, her discomfort growing. Emily was certain she was not the first guest to encounter this situation. "I'm sorry, but our online system might be outdated," Melissa replied, her voice becoming more strained. The exchange continued, but Emily's mind was already 2 steps ahead. She had anticipated this moment. The dismissal, the polite rejection, the thinly veiled judgment based solely on how she appeared. What she hadn't anticipated, however, was the presence of someone else in the hotel lobby who would change everything. The next day, Emily stood outside the Carlton Hotel, her breath visible in the crisp morning air. The hotel was an architectural masterpiece, sleek, modern, and undeniably luxurious. As she approached the revolving doors, she felt a familiar tension in the pit of her stomach. This was it, the first test, Everything she had prepared for had led to this moment. She smoothed down the gray sweater she had worn countless times over the past few days, making sure it looked neat but not out of place. Her light-washed jeans were slightly faded, the cuffs a bit frayed, but they were clean. Everything about her appearance was intentionally neutral, deliberately average. She had purposefully avoided anything that could elevate her look beyond what was considered ordinary. Emily knew that the people working in these spaces were trained to spot outsiders, to recognize those who didn't belong, and today, she would test how far that training went. Inside the lobby, the polished floors reflected the soft, golden light from crystal chandeliers. The air smelled faintly of fresh flowers and expensive perfume. Guests dressed in sharp suits and sleek gowns moved with a confidence that Emily had always admired from a distance. She wasn't one of them, and that much was certain. But today, she wasn't here as a guest. She was here as a researcher, a participant in her own experiment. Emily approached the reception desk, where a young woman with dark, perfectly styled hair greeted her with a bright smile. The name on her tag read Sophia, in elegant script. Emily returned the smile and slid her credit card across the counter, just as she had done the night before. "Good morning," she said, her voice steady and polite. "I'd like to book a suite, please." Sophia's eyes flickered momentarily from Emily's face to her attire, then back to her credit card. Emily watched the subtle shift in her expression. It was brief, but it didn't go unnoticed. The woman's professional mask slipped for just a second, her eyes narrowing slightly as she assessed Emily. The smile that had been warm and welcoming a moment ago now seemed strained, like she was unsure whether she should engage further. "Do you have a reservation?" Sophia asked, her tone polite but businesslike, a hint of doubt creeping in. "No, I don't. But I checked your website 30 minutes ago, and it shows that you have several suites available," Emily replied, keeping her tone even. Sophia's fingers hovered over the keyboard, typing slowly. She glanced at the screen, her fingers stopping for a moment as though unsure of what to say. Emily could feel the hesitation in the air. There it was, the first rejection, the first moment when her appearance had become a barrier. "I'm afraid we don't have any rooms available at the moment," Sophia said, her voice soft, almost apologetic. Emily wasn't surprised, but she had expected a more polished response, something that would conceal the underlying bias. She leaned in slightly, pressing just enough to keep the conversation going. "That's strange," Emily said. "Your online system clearly shows availability for 2 suites. Would you mind checking again?" Sophia's eyes briefly darted to the manager standing off to the side, observing the situation from a distance. Emily noticed the glance, and it confirmed what she had suspected. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't an issue of availability. This was an issue of how she was being perceived. Sophia hesitated again. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but our records show that we are fully booked for the night." Emily nodded, playing along for a moment before pressing further. "That's odd," she said, her voice just loud enough for the people around them to hear. "I've checked several luxury hotels in the area, and all of them are more than happy to accommodate me." There was a brief pause. Sophia's smile had almost completely vanished now, replaced by a subtle look of discomfort. Emily could tell she was trying to regain control of the situation. She had been in this position before, speaking to people who wanted to act professionally, but couldn't hide the discomfort when they were faced with someone they deemed out of place. Emily glanced around the lobby, noting the other guests who were checking in without issue. They were dressed in tailored suits, high heels, and perfectly styled hair. The contrast was stark, and it was becoming painfully clear to her that, despite her financial stability and proper conduct, she wasn't being seen as a guest. She was being judged based on something far more superficial. "Is there a problem here?" A voice suddenly interrupted. The voice was authoritative, and it came from a tall man in a custom-tailored suit. He approached the counter with a confident stride, his eyes scanning the scene with practiced precision. Emily's gaze followed him, noting the ease with which he moved, the calm assurance that came with wealth and status. His name tag read Mr. Reynolds, and the way he carried himself made it clear he was a manager, possibly someone who had seen it all. Sophia, visibly relieved at the arrival of the man, immediately straightened up. "There seems to be a misunderstanding, Mr. Reynolds," she said, her voice softer now, almost deferential. "This guest was asking about availability, but we're showing no rooms for tonight." Reynolds gave Emily a cursory glance, his eyes narrowing slightly as he assessed her appearance. His gaze lingered just a moment longer than necessary, and Emily could feel his judgment settling like a weight on her chest. She wasn't surprised by the dismissal, but she did feel the sharpness of it, the subtle message that she didn't fit the profile of the type of guest this hotel catered to. "I see," Mr. Reynolds said smoothly, though there was a coolness in his tone. "I apologize for the inconvenience. As you know, we have very strict policies here at the Carlton Hotel regarding guest appearances." He turned to Emily, addressing her directly now, his voice laden with a faint condescension. "We pride ourselves on offering a certain level of exclusivity and decorum for our guests." Emily raised an eyebrow but kept her composure. "Are you telling me that my appearance is the reason I'm being denied a room?" she asked, her voice calm but firm, allowing the question to hang in the air. Reynolds' face hardened slightly, his professional mask settling back into place. "Our standards are clearly outlined on our website. We maintain a dress code that is in line with the luxury experience we offer," he said, his words smooth but dismissive. "This is a 5-star hotel, ma'am. We expect our guests to meet a certain standard." Emily could feel the weight of his words. There it was again, the invisible barrier, the unspoken rule that certain people didn't belong, that appearances defined worth. She hadn't expected to be met with anything less, but it still stung. She glanced at Sophia, who was now standing behind the desk, her posture rigid, as if she was waiting for approval from her superior. "Of course," Emily said, her voice unwavering. She could feel the sting of rejection but refused to let it show. She'd known this would happen. This was why she was here, this was the point of the experiment. Sophia, now visibly uncomfortable, shifted on her feet. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," she said quickly, her voice lacking the warmth it had earlier. "I hope you understand our policy." She didn't meet Emily's eyes, a clear sign of guilt. Emily smiled politely, nodding in acknowledgement. "Thank you for your time," she said, her tone polite but colder than before. She had gathered the evidence she needed. This moment, this interaction, was exactly what she had expected. And it was only the beginning. She turned and walked toward the exit, keeping her head high as she moved through the gleaming lobby. As she stepped outside, she felt the rush of the cold air against her skin. The city seemed indifferent, bustling with people who would never know the story behind the rejection she had just experienced. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, the vibration breaking the silence of the moment. She fished it out and saw a message from Marcus, her producer. "Did you get it?" Emily's fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before she typed a response. "Yes, it's all there. Phase 1 is complete." She slipped the phone back into her pocket and took a deep breath. This was just the beginning, and she knew the road ahead would be long. But she was committed now more than ever. Her mission wasn't about a single rejection. It was about revealing the truth that lay beneath the polished exterior of luxury hotels, a truth that had been hidden for far too long. As Emily walked down the street, the city lights flickered around her, casting long shadows on the pavement. She felt an unfamiliar sense of resolve settle into her bones. She wasn't just a woman being rejected by a hotel. She was a part of something much bigger. The experiment had started, and soon the world would see the truth. Emily's days blurred together as she continued her research, moving from hotel to hotel, documenting each rejection. Each time, she followed the same process. Arrive with the same unassuming attire, approach the reception desk with the same calm demeanor, and ask for a suite with the same polite confidence. And each time, without fail, she was met with the same cold dismissal. It had only been a few days since her encounter at the Carlton, but the sting of rejection had begun to wear on her. Despite knowing this was the purpose of her experiment, despite knowing that this was the reality she was exposing, Emily couldn't help but feel the weight of it pressing down on her. It wasn't just about the hotels anymore. It wasn't just about documenting the policies that discriminated against people like her. It was about her. It was about how, after each rejection, she felt less and less like a person, more like a statistic in a broken system. But there was no time to dwell on her feelings. She had a mission to complete. Today, she was at the Grandview Hotel, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that stood as a symbol of the city's elite. She had done her homework, as always, reviewing the hotel's website, reading reviews, and making sure that it fit the criteria she had set out for her experiment. It wasn't just about the grandeur of the hotel or the exclusivity of its clientele. It was about the subtle cues that marked people as worthy or undesirable. As Emily approached the entrance, she felt a familiar anxiety creep into her chest. The doorman, dressed in a perfectly pressed uniform, nodded curtly at her but made no effort to open the door. She didn't expect him to. It wasn't his job to welcome people who didn't belong in the space. She had already observed the way the other guests were treated. The warm smiles, the careful attention, the unspoken acknowledgement that they were the ones who were meant to be there. She knew what was coming. Inside, the lobby was just as she had expected. Immaculate, with polished marble floors, a grand chandelier, and guests who looked as though they had stepped out of a magazine. As she moved toward the reception desk, she took note of every detail. The polished surfaces, the expensive art pieces on the walls, the hushed whispers of conversation between guests. No one looked at her. No one noticed her. She wasn't there to be noticed. She was here to observe, to document. The receptionist was a young woman with a sharp bob haircut, her uniform perfectly tailored. Emily smiled politely and approached the desk, sliding her credit card across the counter, just as she had done before. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice steady but tinged with the fatigue of the countless rejections she had already faced. "I'd like to book a suite for the night." The receptionist glanced at Emily, then at the credit card. The brief flicker in her eyes didn't go unnoticed. Emily had seen it before, the subtle moment of hesitation, the second when the person behind the desk judged whether she belonged in this space or not. "Do you have a reservation?" the receptionist asked, her tone cool but professional. "No, I don't. But I checked your website earlier, and it looks like you have availability for several suites tonight," Emily replied, maintaining her composure. The receptionist typed a few words into the computer, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard, but Emily could tell that she was stalling. Emily leaned in slightly, her voice calm but firm. "Are you sure? I'm sure I saw several rooms available." The receptionist didn't respond immediately. Her fingers hovered over the keys, and Emily could see the discomfort in her posture. She glanced briefly over her shoulder, and that was when Emily knew. The same pattern was unfolding. The receptionist wasn't the one making the decision. This was a decision that was made long before Emily ever stepped foot in the hotel. As the receptionist hesitated, Emily's patience wore thin. She had done everything by the book, everything that should have made her a welcome guest at a luxury hotel. She had reviewed the policies, she had made sure to be polite and courteous, and she had offered no reason for rejection beyond her appearance. And yet, it seemed that this was the one detail that mattered most. The receptionist glanced nervously toward the back office, where a manager was talking to another guest. Emily saw her opportunity. "I know you have availability," Emily said calmly, her voice carrying just enough to be heard by the few people waiting behind her. "I checked your online system just before I came in. If there is a problem, I would appreciate if you could let me know." The receptionist stiffened, and a brief moment of tension filled the air. Emily could see her mind racing, trying to decide whether to continue the interaction or pass her off to someone else. After what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke. "I'll need to check with my manager," the receptionist said, her voice polite but strained, as if the very act of making this request was uncomfortable for her. Emily nodded, allowing her to walk away. As she stood there, the lobby seemed to grow quieter, the air thick with the unspoken. She couldn't help but feel the sting of being judged so openly. She wasn't asking for any special treatment. She simply wanted to be treated like anyone else. But that was never going to happen as long as appearance continued to be the deciding factor in her worth. A few minutes passed before the receptionist returned, now accompanied by a tall man with a carefully composed expression. His dark suit was impeccable, his tie straight, and he carried himself with an air of authority. The name tag on his chest read Mr. Thornton, and he had the distinct look of someone accustomed to managing difficult situations. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said, his voice smooth but distant. "I understand there's been a little confusion. We do indeed have rooms available, but I'm afraid we cannot accommodate you at this time." Emily's pulse quickened, but she remained calm. She had been anticipating this moment. "I don't understand," she said, her voice steady. "You have rooms available and I've offered to pay with my credit card. What's the issue?" Mr. Thornton hesitated for a brief moment before answering. "It's a matter of our guest standards," he said, his tone polite but firm. "We cater to a very specific clientele, and your appearance does not align with the image we project at this establishment." Emily's heart sank. The words were not unexpected, but hearing them spoken out loud, so plainly, so matter-of-factly, made her feel the full weight of the system she was trying to expose. She forced herself to stay composed, taking a deep breath before speaking again. "I see," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "So you're telling me that I'm being rejected not because of any failure on my part, but because of how I look?" Mr. Thornton's eyes flickered for just a moment, as if momentarily unsure how to respond, but he quickly regained his composure. "I'm afraid so, ma'am," he said, his voice becoming more clipped, as though he were reading from a script. "It's a matter of maintaining a certain level of decorum, as our guests expect." Emily's mind raced as she processed the information. It wasn't just the rejection, it was the system that allowed this to happen. She had known it existed, but now, standing face to face with it, she felt a pang of disbelief. This was institutionalized discrimination, hidden behind the polished veneer of luxury. And it wasn't just about the Carlton Hotel, it was about every high-end hotel, every upscale establishment, every exclusive space where people like her were shut out based on nothing more than their appearance. Mr. Thornton glanced at the receptionist, who was still standing behind the desk, looking uncomfortable and unsure of how to intervene. Emily knew she wasn't going to get any further here. The pattern had been established, and this encounter was no different from the others. The system had rejected her, and no amount of polite questioning or persistence would change that. "Thank you for your time," Emily said, her voice surprisingly steady, despite the frustration that churned inside her. "I think I understand your policies now." She turned and walked toward the exit, each step feeling heavier than the last. As she passed through the lobby, she could feel the eyes of the other guests on her. The briefest glances, the unspoken judgments, they were all part of the same system. It wasn't just the staff who had rejected her. It was everyone in this space who had internalized these invisible barriers. Outside, Emily paused, taking a moment to breathe in the cool air. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, the familiar vibration pulling her back to reality. It was a message from Marcus. How did it go? She glanced at the message and quickly typed a response. Another rejection. Same story, different hotel. We've got what we need. As she hit send, Emily couldn't help but wonder just how many more times she would have to experience this before the world was ready to face the truth. She wasn't sure, but one thing was certain: this project would continue. She would not stop until she had exposed the system for what it was. Emily's frustration grew with each passing day. Her journey through luxury hotels had only confirmed what she already knew. Appearance was the single most important thing in determining who belonged and who did not. Despite the increasing evidence of systematic exclusion, she felt herself becoming numb to the rejections. The disappointment had settled in her bones like a familiar weight. She had expected it, but the reality of it, repeated so many times, was still hard to bear. She had visited more than a dozen hotels in the past 2 weeks, each one offering a variation on the same theme. The rejection was always the same. There was always an excuse. Rooms were full, reservations had been misplaced, or the online system was wrong. But the reasons for turning her away weren't the point anymore. The point was that every time she was dismissed, it revealed another layer of the problem. These establishments weren't just rejecting her. They were rejecting an entire class of people who didn't meet their standards, people who, in their eyes, were invisible. It wasn't just the physical act of turning her away that bothered Emily. It was the fact that the system was built on such a fragile foundation. It was a system that relied entirely on perceptions, judgments made before any real interaction. Her mother had always told her that it didn't matter how hard you worked. If you didn't fit into the mold, you were nothing more than a cog in the machine. But Emily had always fought that belief. She had always believed that people should be valued for who they were, not what they wore. And now, as she stood outside yet another hotel, it was becoming clear that her mission wasn't just to prove a point. It was to tear down the walls of a system that had been built on these invisible biases for generations. Today's target was the prestigious Regency Hotel, one of the city's most renowned establishments. From the outside, it appeared to be just another luxury hotel, but Emily had done her homework. The Regency was known for its exclusive events, its high-profile guests, and the impeccable reputation it held in the hospitality industry. This was the place where the city's elite gathered, where wealth and status were celebrated, and where the undesirables were quietly turned away. Emily had already been told that the Regency had a reputation for being selective with its guests, but she wanted to see it firsthand. It wasn't just about documenting another rejection. It was about showing the world how deeply these biases ran. As she approached the entrance of the Regency, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. The hotel's exterior was grand, its stone columns towering above the entrance. The valet parked luxury cars in front of the building, and the doormen greeted guests with practiced smiles. The atmosphere was one of exclusivity, a place where only the select few could ever feel truly welcome. Emily took a deep breath and walked inside, her steps measured, her nerves steeled against what was to come. The lobby was everything she expected, opulent and extravagant. Gold-leafed accents adorned the walls, and a grand chandelier hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow across the space. Guests in tailored suits and elegant dresses milled about, chatting in hushed voices, while staff moved with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Emily took it all in, noting the stark contrast between her simple appearance and the polished world around her. This was a place built on appearances, where wealth, status, and image were the only things that mattered. She walked up to the reception desk, where a young woman in a sharp uniform greeted her with a practiced smile. The woman's name tag read Chloe, and her eyes briefly flickered as Emily approached, her smile tightening just slightly before she spoke. "Good afternoon, ma'am. How can I help you?" Chloe's voice was professional, but there was a coolness to it, something Emily had learned to recognize over the past few weeks. It was the unspoken judgment. "I'd like to book a suite for tonight," Emily said, sliding her credit card across the counter with a smile. "I've checked your website, and it shows that you have rooms available." Chloe glanced down at the card and then back up at Emily, her expression unreadable. There was a brief pause, just enough to let the tension settle between them. Emily kept her gaze steady, waiting for the response that she had grown accustomed to. But there was something different about today. Something in the air felt heavier, as if the rejection was already written in the lines of Chloe's posture. Chloe's fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment longer than necessary. Emily watched her closely, noticing how her eyes flickered briefly to the other guests in the lobby. It was as if Chloe was taking a mental note, deciding whether to treat Emily as an equal or simply another person who didn't fit the image of the hotel's ideal guest. Emily could feel the subtle shift in energy, the shift that occurred whenever she was perceived as out of place. "I'm afraid our suites are unavailable tonight," Chloe finally said, her tone cool and unflinching. "We're fully booked." Emily leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but firm. "I just checked your website 20 minutes ago, and it showed that there were 3 suites available. Are you telling me your system is incorrect?" Chloe's lips pressed together, and for a split second, Emily saw the faintest hint of discomfort flash across her face. It was barely noticeable, but it was there. The receptionist's smile tightened. "It's possible the system hasn't updated properly, ma'am, but I assure you we are at full capacity tonight." Emily allowed the silence to linger for a moment, letting Chloe's words sink in. She knew exactly what this was. It wasn't about the rooms, it was about her. It was about the invisible standards that these hotels adhered to, standards that had nothing to do with qualifications, financial capacity, or even basic respect. It was about the appearance of those who walked through the door and the assumptions made based on that alone. "I see," Emily said, her voice now louder than before, just enough to draw the attention of a few nearby guests. "So, what you're saying is that I'm being turned away because of how I look." Chloe's eyes widened, and she quickly glanced over her shoulder to the hotel manager, who had been watching the interaction from behind a pillar. The tension in the air thickened, and Emily could feel the weight of their scrutiny on her. The manager, a man in his mid-40s with a neatly combed hairstyle and a no-nonsense attitude, walked up to the counter, a stern look on his face. His name tag read Mr. Hastings. "Is there a problem here, miss?" Mr. Hastings addressed Emily, his tone polite but carrying an unmistakable edge. Emily turned to face him, her expression unchanged. "I'm just trying to book a suite for the night. The website says you have availability, but your receptionist just told me you're full. I'm curious about the discrepancy." Mr. Hastings' eyes flicked toward Chloe, who quickly lowered her gaze. He cleared his throat before speaking. "Our rooms are allocated to our premium clients first. If you'd like, I can recommend other hotels in the area that may have rooms available." He paused for a moment, then added with a faint smile, "But I'm sure you understand, we cater to a very specific clientele here." Emily's mind raced, but she kept her voice even. "So you're saying I don't meet your standards, Mr. Hastings?" He blinked, clearly not expecting such a direct confrontation. "I'm saying that we are very particular about the kind of guests we welcome. Our clientele expects a certain atmosphere." The implication was clear, and for a moment, Emily felt a surge of anger rise within her, but she held it back. She had seen this same scenario play out time and again in her previous encounters, and this wasn't about getting angry. This was about capturing the truth. "Thank you for your time," Emily said calmly, her voice steady despite the swirling frustration inside her. "I think I understand your standards now." Without waiting for a response, Emily turned on her heel and walked toward the door. As she passed through the lobby, she couldn't help but notice the eyes that followed her. The looks of curiosity, the sideways glances, the barely concealed judgment. To them, she was just another unworthy guest, just another undesirable, in a place where only the worthy mattered. As she stepped outside into the cold night air, Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The rejection stung, but it was nothing new. It was the same rejection she had encountered at every other hotel. But tonight felt different. She was closer to the truth than ever before. These moments, these small, seemingly insignificant rejections, were the foundation of her project. They were the proof of a system that had been operating in plain sight for far too long. She pulled out her phone and tapped out a quick message to Marcus, her producer. "Phase 1 is done. Another rejection, another hotel. Same story." She hit send and stood there for a moment, the weight of it all settling in. This wasn't just about proving that appearance mattered. It was about breaking down the barriers that had kept people like her from ever being seen in the first place. And with each hotel, each rejection, she was one step closer to making that change. The days following Emily's latest rejection were filled with a quiet sense of resolve. She had come to expect the dismissive glances and polite refusals from the hotels she visited, but each instance left her more determined to continue. The rejection wasn't personal, she reminded herself. It was part of the process. It was proof of the system she was trying to expose. Despite the emotional toll of the constant rejections, Emily found herself more focused than ever. The project was advancing, and soon she would have enough evidence to confront the industry's biases head-on. But there was something else stirring within her, something that she hadn't anticipated, a feeling that perhaps there was more to this story than she had originally thought. One evening, after another cold reception at a luxury hotel, Emily returned to her apartment feeling the weight of her exhaustion. She dropped her bag onto the couch and glanced at the stack of reports on the coffee table, documenting her daily experiences. The patterns were becoming increasingly clear. It wasn't just the hotels or the employees. It was a broader issue. It was society's entrenched biases, perceptions of wealth, class, and appearance that dictated who was allowed to occupy spaces of privilege. Her phone buzzed, breaking her train of thought. It was a text from Marcus. "I have a lead. Call me." She felt a flicker of curiosity as she dialed his number. Marcus was more than just her producer. He was her closest confidant in this project, the person who helped keep everything moving forward. If he had a lead, it could mean the next phase of the project was about to unfold. "Hey, what's up?" she said as soon as he picked up. "I think you should meet someone," Marcus replied. His voice had an unusual edge to it. "I know you're focused on your experiment, but this could be a game changer." Emily sat up straighter, her interest piqued. "Who are you talking about?" "A guy named William Harrington," Marcus said. "He's a major player in the hospitality industry. Big shot. I've been looking into his background, and he's been pretty vocal about the need for reform in the industry. He doesn't know what we're working on, but he's someone we need to talk to." Emily was silent for a moment, processing the information. William Harrington? She had heard the name before. He was known for his investments in several high-end hotels and his recent push for greater inclusivity in hospitality. The fact that he was advocating for change made him an interesting prospect. But why would he want to speak with her, and how could he help with the project? "Why would he want to meet with me?" Emily asked, unsure of what to make of the situation. "Because he's interested in seeing real change in his industry," Marcus replied. "I think he sees what you're doing as a way to make that happen. But you've got to meet him in person to find out for sure." Emily thought about it for a moment. This was unexpected, but if what Marcus said was true, this could be the opportunity she'd been waiting for. An insider who was not only aware of the problem but also eager to confront it. The idea of working with someone who could potentially bring about real change was both thrilling and terrifying. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew this was a crucial moment in the project. "All right, set it up," Emily said, her decision made. "Let's see what he has to say." The following morning, Emily found herself preparing for a meeting that she hadn't anticipated. The uncertainty of it made her cautious, but she couldn't deny the excitement that bubbled beneath the surface. Marcus had arranged for her to meet William Harrington at one of the city's most exclusive venues, a rooftop bar known for attracting influential figures in the business world. It was a place where the city's elite gathered to discuss everything from business strategies to philanthropic ventures. Emily was familiar with the location, but today it felt different. She wasn't here as an observer. She was here as a participant in a conversation that could potentially change the course of her project. As she arrived at the venue, the view of the city stretched before her, the towering buildings reflecting the early morning light. She wasn't dressed in her usual attire. Today, she had chosen a simple yet professional outfit. No jeans, no gray sweater, just a tailored blazer and slacks. She had decided it was time to present herself differently, to show Harrington that she was not just a subject of an experiment, but someone who could contribute meaningfully to the conversation. Emily took a deep breath as she entered the bar, the quiet hum of conversations filling the air. She spotted Marcus sitting at a corner table with a man she assumed was Harrington. He was an older gentleman, well-groomed, wearing a sharp suit that fit him perfectly. There was a certain calm authority about him, the kind that came from years of navigating powerful circles. He was talking to Marcus when Emily approached, and as he turned to face her, she noticed the sharpness in his eyes. They weren't cold, but they were discerning. He seemed to be assessing her in the same way she had seen hotel staff assess her in the past. "Emily," Marcus said, standing to greet her. "This is William Harrington." "William, this is Emily Harrison, the creator of the Invisibility Project." Harrington extended his hand, and Emily shook it firmly, her gaze meeting his. "It's a pleasure to meet you," he said, his voice smooth, with just the faintest trace of a smile. "I've heard quite a bit about your work. It's impressive." "Thank you," Emily replied, her voice steady. "I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me." They all sat down and Marcus ordered drinks for them. As the waiter left, Emily felt the weight of the conversation that was about to unfold. This wasn't going to be a typical meeting. She could sense that Harrington wasn't just here to discuss the project. He was here because he saw something in it, something that could benefit not only his own interests but also the wider industry. The question was, what did he expect in return? After a brief pause, Harrington leaned in slightly, his hands folded in front of him. "So, Emily, tell me more about what you're trying to accomplish with your project," he said, his tone casual, but with an underlying intensity that made it clear he was truly interested. Emily took a breath, choosing her words carefully. "I've been documenting the ways in which luxury hotels, like the ones I've visited, reject guests based solely on appearance. These establishments, which pride themselves on offering luxury and exclusivity, often turn away perfectly capable guests because they don't meet a certain visual standard. My goal is to expose this systemic bias and ultimately push for change in the industry." Harrington nodded slowly, clearly processing her words. "I've read about the disparities in the industry," he said thoughtfully, "and I agree there's an issue with how people are treated based on their appearance. But it's deeper than that, isn't it? It's about a system that's been ingrained for decades. You're not just fighting an individual bias, you're fighting an entire culture." Emily didn't expect such direct insight from him. She had anticipated the usual corporate responses, the attempts to distance oneself from the problem, the deflections. But Harrington seemed to get it immediately. He wasn't shying away from the truth. "That's exactly right," Emily said, her voice gaining confidence. "It's about changing the very structure of the industry, how policies are written, how staff is trained, how guests are selected. It's about making the invisible visible." Harrington leaned back in his chair, studying her with a mix of curiosity and respect. "You know, it's rare to find someone who's not just aware of the problem but is actively working to change it. I admire that. But you must know, change at this scale is not easy." "I know," Emily replied, her tone resolute, "but I'm not backing down. The more I see, the more I realize how deep this goes. And the more I'm convinced that the industry needs to be held accountable." There was a long pause as Harrington seemed to reflect on her words. He tapped his fingers lightly on the table, his expression thoughtful. "I've spent a long time in this industry, Emily," he finally said. "And while I agree with your assessment, I also know how difficult it will be to shift the mindset of an entire industry. People are comfortable with the status quo. But maybe there's a way we can work together to accelerate that change." Emily felt a spark of hope. This wasn't just another wealthy executive brushing her off. This was someone who was acknowledging the problem and, perhaps, offering a way to address it. "I'm listening," she said, leaning forward slightly. Harrington's gaze sharpened, and he spoke with a sense of purpose. "I have the resources and connections to get this movement the attention it deserves. I've been advocating for change from the inside, but what you're doing could amplify that. We could bring this issue to the forefront, not just in the hospitality world, but in the public consciousness." After her meeting with William Harrington, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. The conversation had been a turning point, a moment where the right pieces seemed to be falling into place. Harrington was more than just a businessman. He was a man who recognized the flaws in the system and was willing to work with her to expose them. There was still a long road ahead, but now, she had a potential ally in the industry who could help her bring her findings to a wider audience. The next few days were a whirlwind of planning. Emily and Marcus worked together to strategize the next steps of the project. With Harrington's offer of support, they could take things to the next level. He had connections to key people in the hospitality industry, including hotel executives and influential public figures. He had promised to use those connections to create a platform for Emily's work, to help spread the message far and wide. But as the days passed, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to Harrington's involvement than he was letting on. It was late one evening when she received a call from Marcus. He was excited, his voice crackling through the phone. "Emily, you won't believe it. Harrington's team has arranged for you to meet some of the top hotel executives next week. This could be huge." Emily leaned back in her chair, letting the news settle in. A meeting with top executives from the hospitality industry? This was the opportunity she had been waiting for, the chance to confront the very people who were responsible for the systemic issues she had been documenting. She had hoped for a breakthrough, but this felt like a step beyond anything she had imagined. "I'm ready," Emily said, her voice firm. "Set it up. Let's make this count." The meeting was scheduled for the following week, and Emily knew she needed to prepare. This was no longer just about documenting her experiences. It was about advocating for change in a way that could impact the industry at a fundamental level. She had been collecting evidence for months, and now she had the chance to present it to the people who had the power to make real changes. In the days leading up to the meeting, Emily reviewed the footage she had gathered, making notes about key moments that would illustrate the blatant discrimination she had faced. She was determined to make her case compelling. But as she prepared, a nagging feeling lingered in the back of her mind. Harrington's sudden involvement in the project, his eagerness to help. She couldn't help but wonder about his true intentions. Marcus had told her that Harrington was a reformer, someone who genuinely cared about the issues Emily was trying to expose. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story, something beneath the surface. She had learned the hard way that people with power often had their own agendas, and she didn't want to be blindsided by an ulterior motive. She would have to stay vigilant no matter how promising this partnership seemed. The night before the meeting, Emily couldn't sleep. She paced around her apartment, reviewing her notes, mentally rehearsing her arguments. The stakes were higher than ever, and she needed to be sharp. But just as she was about to turn off the lights and get some rest, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Harrington. "Emily, I hope you're ready for tomorrow. This is going to be an important moment. Looking forward to seeing how you present your findings. Let's change the industry together." There was something in his message that felt rehearsed, too perfect. Emily read it again, trying to find a hint of sincerity, but the words just seemed too calculated. She shook her head, trying to push the doubt aside. This was her chance to bring real change to an industry that desperately needed it. She couldn't afford to let her suspicions cloud her focus now. The day of the meeting arrived, and Emily found herself standing outside a sleek, modern conference building, her nerves a bit more frayed than she'd like to admit. This was it, the culmination of everything she had worked for. Today, she wasn't just meeting with high-level hotel executives. She was presenting her findings to them, to the very people who shaped the policies she had spent months documenting. Her outfit was simple but professional, nothing too flashy, just a clean-cut blazer over a modest blouse and slacks. She knew she had to strike the right balance between appearing polished and maintaining her authenticity. She wasn't here to impress them with her appearance. She was here to impress them with her evidence and the urgency of the issue at hand. Marcus had already arrived and was setting up the equipment for her presentation. He greeted her with a quick hug, his enthusiasm palpable. "This is it, Emily," he said, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "This could change everything." She nodded, her throat tight with anticipation. She wasn't sure if the excitement was hers or his, but she couldn't deny that the weight of what she was about to do pressed heavily on her chest. She had done all the legwork, collected the footage, analyzed the patterns, and compiled the data. But today, she wasn't just presenting information. She was challenging these executives to look at their industry in a way they had never been forced to before. As the room filled with well-dressed hotel executives, Emily took a deep breath, trying to center herself. She could feel their eyes on her, each one a subtle judgment as they scanned her attire, her presence. It was clear that most of them hadn't expected someone like her to be the one presenting. She wasn't a high-powered CEO or an industry mogul. She was just a woman with a camera, a mission, and an unwavering belief in what she was doing. Harrington walked in, his usual calm demeanor exuding an air of authority. He gave Emily a nod of acknowledgement as he took his seat near the front of the room. His presence was commanding, and she couldn't help but notice how the others immediately seemed to defer to him. Despite her suspicions about his motivations, Emily knew that his support would give her the platform she needed to get her message across. When the last of the executives took their seats, Emily stepped to the front of the room, her heart pounding in her chest. She clicked a button on her laptop, and the projector screen lit up, displaying the title of her presentation: The Invisibility Project, exposing the unseen bias in hospitality. The first clip began to play, footage from one of her earlier hotel visits. The receptionist's cold glance as Emily approached, the subtle shift in posture, the barely perceptible look of disdain. As the clip played, Emily could feel the room grow silent. She could almost hear the executive's thoughts, questions, discomfort, disbelief. She pressed on, showing them more footage, each clip more damning than the last. The rejections, the dismissive comments, the subtle microaggressions, each moment she had captured was now projected for them to see, in full detail. Emily wasn't just showing them what had happened to her. She was showing them a pattern, a systemic issue that was too deeply ingrained to be ignored any longer. As the last clip ended, Emily let the silence linger for a moment. She glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of the executives. Some were uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. Others avoided eye contact altogether. But none of them spoke, at least not yet. She knew this moment was crucial. This was her opportunity to make them confront the reality of what she had been exposing. "I'm sure you all recognize the behavior in these clips," Emily said, her voice steady but carrying the weight of everything she had experienced. "What you're seeing isn't an isolated incident. This is happening every day in your hotels across the country, maybe even worldwide. People are being judged and rejected not for their ability to pay or their qualifications, but for something as superficial as their appearance." The room remained silent. Emily could see the wheels turning in the minds of the executives, some of them visibly unsettled. She continued, "This isn't just about one hotel or one incident. This is about an entire industry built on a culture of exclusion. The policies you've put in place, the standards you've set, they're designed to keep certain people out, not because they don't deserve to be here, but because they don't look the part. And that has to change." She paused, letting her words settle in the room. The hospitality industry prides itself on being welcoming and inclusive. But the truth is, if you're not a part of the right class, if you don't look the way society tells you to look, you'll be invisible. That's what this project is about, making the invisible visible. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Emily could feel the weight of their gaze, but she refused to shrink under it. She was here to change things, and she knew that this was the only way. Finally, Harrington spoke, his voice cutting through the tension. "What Emily is saying is not just important. It's necessary. And it's not just a matter of being politically correct. This is about fairness, about dignity, about what your customers and your employees deserve." Emily turned to face him, grateful for his support but still unsure of his true intentions. Harrington's influence in the room was undeniable, but his involvement in this moment felt like a double-edged sword. Was he truly committed to change, or was he simply looking to clean up his industry's image? The week after the meeting with the hotel executives passed in a blur of anticipation and frustration. Emily had laid the groundwork for something big, but the silence from the executives was deafening. She had expected some pushback, maybe some resistance, but not complete radio silence. The meeting had gone well, and her findings were irrefutable. She had given them a chance to change, to face the issues head-on, yet it seemed like they were avoiding any meaningful conversation about it. As the days wore on, Emily found herself more frustrated than ever. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Her mind kept returning to William Harrington. He had been supportive during the meeting, but Emily couldn't ignore the fact that he had a vested interest in the hospitality industry. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that his motives were not entirely clear. Was he truly interested in change, or was he simply trying to avoid the bad press and protect his investments? It wasn't just about what he said, it was about what he didn't say. One morning, as Emily was sitting in her apartment reviewing footage for the next phase of her project, she received an unexpected call. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice on the other end was instantly recognizable. It was Marcus. "Emily, we need to talk," he said, his voice urgent. "What's going on?" she asked, sitting up straight. "It's Harrington," Marcus replied. "I've been hearing some things. There's more to this than we thought." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She stood up and began pacing around the room. "What do you mean, more to this?" "I've been digging around, trying to figure out exactly what his role is in all this, Marcus explained. And I found something. It's not just about him wanting to make a change in the industry. He's been making moves behind the scenes to control the narrative. He's trying to position himself as the savior, but he's not willing to make the kind of sacrifices the industry needs. He's just trying to profit off of this situation. Emily's mind raced. This wasn't the breakthrough she had hoped for. This was a complication. So he's using this for his own gain? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. I think so, Marcus said. I don't have all the details yet, but I'm working on getting more information. I think it's time you confront him. It's time to figure out where he really stands. Emily's thoughts were a whirlwind. If Harrington was manipulating the situation for his own benefit, it would undermine everything she was trying to do. She had no intention of allowing her project to be co-opted by someone who was more interested in personal gain than systemic change. But she couldn't afford to make any rash moves. She needed to get the facts. I'll meet with him, Emily said after a pause. But I need to be careful. If he's really pulling strings behind the scenes, I can't let him turn this into a PR stunt. I'll have to go in prepared. Marcus agreed, his voice tinged with concern. Just be careful, Emily. Don't let him use you. After hanging up, Emily sat back down at her desk, her mind racing. This was the moment she had feared. She had hoped for an ally in Harrington, but now it seemed like she was facing a different kind of challenge. One that could jeopardize everything she had worked for. But she couldn't afford to back down now. The stakes were higher than ever, and Emily was determined to expose the truth, no matter who was standing in her way. The meeting with Harrington was set for the following day. She knew she needed to go in with her eyes wide open. She couldn't trust anyone fully, not even the person who had seemed like her biggest ally. If Harrington was playing a game of his own, she had to be ready to call him out. The next day, Emily arrived at the sleek building where the meeting with Harrington was scheduled. The modern design of the building mirrored the polished facade of the hospitality industry. Shiny, professional, and clean-cut. But beneath the surface, Emily could already sense that there were cracks waiting to be exposed. She stood in the lobby, waiting for the elevator to take her to the top floor where Harrington's office awaited, her mind swirling with the information Marcus had shared. As the elevator doors closed, Emily's reflection in the mirrored walls seemed to mock her. She had started this journey with a singular purpose, to expose the truth. But now that truth was muddled. Harrington, the man who had seemed like her greatest ally, was no longer the straightforward reformer he appeared to be. The unsettling doubts Marcus had planted in her mind about Harrington's true intentions lingered heavily. The elevator reached the top floor, and the doors opened with a soft chime. Harrington's office was just as polished as the building, with glass walls offering a stunning view of the city below. He was standing by the large windows, gazing out at the skyline, his silhouette sharp against the light. When he turned to face her, he greeted her with his usual warm smile. But this time, it didn't reach his eyes. Emily, welcome. I'm glad you could make it, Harrington said, motioning toward the chair opposite his desk. Thanks for meeting with me, Emily replied, trying to keep her voice neutral. I think we need to have an honest conversation. Harrington raised an eyebrow, his expression flickering with interest. Of course. Please, take a seat. Emily sat down, but she didn't immediately speak. She studied him carefully, trying to gauge his intentions. Everything about him screamed professionalism, but something felt off. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, and she knew this conversation was about to take a turn. I've been doing some thinking, Emily began, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering. You've been a huge help in advancing the project, but there's something I need to understand. Marcus has brought some things to my attention, and frankly, I'm concerned. Harrington's smile faltered for just a moment, but it was enough for Emily to notice. Concerned about what exactly? He asked, his tone now tinged with something that almost resembled caution. It's about your involvement in this, Emily said, leaning forward slightly, her eyes narrowing. Marcus has discovered that you're not just supporting the cause. You're also positioning yourself in a way that seems more about protecting your brand than actually making real change. There was a pause. For a moment, Harrington didn't speak. His face remained calm, but Emily could see the subtle shift in his body language. The tension was palpable now. He had been expecting her to dig deeper, but he hadn't expected her to confront him so directly. "Emily, I don't think you fully understand," Harrington said, his voice softer now, but laced with an edge. "I've been in this industry long enough to know how these things work. Change doesn't happen overnight. It takes influence, money, and the right connections. I've made sure to position myself as an advocate because that's how you get people to listen." Emily shook her head. "So, you're saying that this is all just a way for you to control the narrative? That you're not actually interested in changing the system, just in benefiting from it?" Harrington's eyes darkened, and for the first time, Emily saw a flicker of something genuine in his gaze. "I've done more for this industry than you can imagine. I've pushed for reform in ways that no one else has. But you need to understand, Emily, there are forces at play here that you have no idea about. The system doesn't just change because you say it should. It's a game, and I'm playing it better than anyone else." Her heart raced, a mixture of anger and realization flooding through her. Everything about him, every gesture, every word he had said up until now, had been about maintaining control, not about creating real change. He wasn't trying to tear down the system. He was trying to reshape it to fit his own image. "Your version of reform isn't good enough," Emily said, her voice gaining strength. "You're using this project to paint yourself as a hero, but in reality, you're just another part of the problem." Harrington's face twisted into something resembling a smile, though it was more of a grimace than anything else. "You think you can change the whole system with your little project? You think your videos, your findings, your evidence, none of that matters. It's not going to make a dent. The real work is done behind closed doors, and that's where I operate." Emily's resolve hardened. She had known there was a risk in trusting Harrington, but now it was clear that she had underestimated the extent of his manipulation. He had no interest in the revolution she was trying to create. For him, it was all about the status quo, repackaged and polished. The only change he cared about was the one that benefited him. "I'm not here for your game, Harrington," she said, standing up. "This project is about making a real difference. And if you're not going to be part of that, then I'll find another way." Emily walked out of William Harrington's office with her head held high, but inside, she was boiling. The conversation had been a wake-up call, an abrupt reminder that not everyone who claims to be an ally is truly on your side. Harrington's polished facade had crumbled in front of her, revealing the true motivations behind his support. It wasn't about reform or making lasting change. It was about maintaining control and profiting from a broken system. The bitter taste of betrayal lingered in her mouth as she stepped into the elevator. She had come into the meeting hoping for clarity, for an ally in her fight against the discrimination she had witnessed firsthand in the luxury hotel industry. Instead, she had found a man who was more interested in protecting his own interests than addressing the systemic problems she was trying to expose. The realization hit her hard. This wasn't going to be a simple fight. If she was going to make a real difference, she couldn't rely on people like Harrington to carry the weight. She had to take matters into her own hands, even if it meant facing the industry alone. As the elevator doors closed and the car descended, Emily's mind raced. She knew that Harrington's influence could be dangerous if left unchecked. His position in the industry, his connections, and his resources could easily turn the narrative in his favor, making him the face of reform while he continued to play the same old game. She couldn't let that happen. She needed to expose the truth, no matter what the cost. Outside the building, the cold air hit her like a shockwave. Emily pulled her coat tighter around her, trying to steady her breath. It was hard to believe that just a few weeks ago, she had been hopeful that her work was making a difference. Now everything felt uncertain. She had no idea what her next move should be. But one thing was clear. She couldn't let Harrington, or anyone else, derail her mission. She fished her phone out of her pocket and quickly dialed Marcus. When he answered, she didn't wait for a greeting. "It's worse than I thought," she said, her voice low. "Harrington's playing a game of his own. He's not here for change. He's here for control." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What do you mean?" Marcus asked, his voice tight with concern. I mean, he's trying to use the project to make himself look like a hero, Emily replied, her frustration growing. But he's not trying to fix anything. He wants to maintain the status quo, just with a shiny new label on it. Marcus cursed under his breath. So what's the next step? Do we back off? Do we go public? No, Emily said firmly. We keep going, but we do it on our terms. We expose the truth, but not with Harrington's help. This is bigger than him. She could almost hear Marcus nodding on the other end. All right, so what's the plan? I'm going to keep gathering evidence. I'll hit the hotels again. But I think it's time to start reaching out to people who actually want to see change. I need to find people who care more about the issue than about their own profit. Marcus was silent for a moment before responding. Sounds like a plan, but you're going to need more than just evidence to make this work. You'll need allies. Real ones. I know, Emily said quietly, and I'll find them. As she ended the call, Emily felt a renewed sense of determination. She was no longer looking for allies in places that only wanted to maintain the status quo. She would find people who saw the problem for what it was and were willing to stand with her to fix it. It was time to stop playing the game by their rules. The following days were a blur of new plans, new connections, and a renewed sense of purpose. Emily was no longer just an observer in the luxury hospitality industry. She was now a disruptor. She had seen the system up close, understood its cracks, and recognized its fundamental flaws. The conversations with Harrington had been a harsh reminder that the people in power were often just as interested in maintaining their positions as they were in creating real change. But instead of succumbing to the weight of his influence, Emily channeled her anger into action. She began reaching out to people who had been overlooked by the system, people who, like her mother, had been relegated to the invisible corners of the hotel industry. Housekeepers, bellhops, maintenance staff, and even low-level managers who had witnessed the systemic bias firsthand. These were the people who knew the industry's underbelly better than anyone, and Emily was determined to make their voices heard. One afternoon, while going through her contacts, Emily found a name that caught her attention. A former hotel manager named Claire Walker. Claire had worked for years at a high-end hotel chain before speaking out against the company's discriminatory hiring practices. Her departure from the industry had made headlines at the time, but Emily had always wondered what had happened to her afterward. She picked up her phone and dialed Claire's number, taking a deep breath as the line rang. When Claire answered, her voice was warm but cautious. Hello, this is Claire. Hi, Claire. Emily began, her voice steady. My name is Emily Harrison. I've been researching the hospitality industry and the issues surrounding discrimination in hotels. I'd love to speak with you about your experiences. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Emily could almost hear Claire considering the request, weighing whether it was worth her time. I've been out of the industry for a while, Claire said slowly, but I do have a few things to say about what I witnessed while I was working in it. If you're serious about exposing the truth, I'll talk. Emily felt a rush of relief. I'm serious. I've been documenting everything, and I think your perspective could make a real difference. The industry needs to hear what people like you have gone through. Claire agreed to meet, and they set up a time for the following week. Emily felt a spark of hope ignite within her. This was the beginning of a new phase in the project. One where real voices, not just her own, could help expose the truth. In the meantime, Emily continued to gather footage and notes. She visited more hotels, some that she hadn't been to before, and began to build a more comprehensive picture of the biases that ran through the entire industry. It wasn't just the way guests were treated based on their appearance. It was the way employees were kept in the shadows, their hard work invisible to the very people who benefited from it. It was clear that the system didn't just discriminate against guests. It also exploited the workers who made the industry run. Housekeepers, for example, were often treated as invisible, expected to do the dirtiest work with little recognition. And even those who had the misfortune of being seen as undesirable by the hotel standards found themselves shut out, regardless of their qualifications or financial means. The more Emily documented, the more she realized the depth of the problem. It wasn't just about what people looked like. It was about an entire culture that had been built to keep the privileged in power and the marginalized out of sight. She wasn't just documenting a single story. She was uncovering a system that was flawed at its very core. As the week passed, Emily prepared for her meeting with Claire. She knew that Claire's insights would be invaluable, but she also knew that this meeting marked a critical point in her project. With each step forward, the stakes were getting higher. The more she uncovered, the more dangerous it became. She had already made powerful enemies in the industry, and if she was going to continue down this path, she needed to be prepared for the fallout. But Emily wasn't afraid. She had come too far to turn back now. The meeting with Claire Walker was set for a small cafe in a quiet part of town, far from the bustling streets where the city's elite would typically be seen. Emily arrived early, her mind racing with questions. She had read about Claire's exit from the hotel industry years ago, but hearing her perspective would bring a new layer of understanding to the project. Claire had been in the heart of the industry, and now, she was one of the few who had the courage to speak out about it. When Claire arrived, she was exactly as Emily had imagined. A woman of authority with a quiet strength. Her suit was simple but tailored to perfection, and her posture was that of someone who had been through her fair share of battles. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. Instead, she sat down and immediately focused on the conversation at hand. "I'm glad you reached out," Claire said, her voice steady. "But I have to be honest with you. What you're doing isn't easy. It's a fight against an entire culture, and it's not just going to be about exposing the truth. You're going up against people with power, with connections, and they won't go down without a fight." Emily nodded, feeling the weight of her words. Claire was right. Everything she had been doing so far had been about documenting, about observing the flaws in the system, but now it felt more like a war. A war she couldn't afford to lose. "I know it won't be easy," Emily said, her voice resolute, "but I'm not doing this for the recognition. I'm doing this to make the invisible visible. The way this industry operates isn't just about who gets to stay in the hotels. It's about how people are treated, from the workers to the guests. It's about how class and appearance determine who's seen and who's ignored." Claire leaned back in her chair, taking a moment to consider Emily's words. "I've seen it firsthand. I worked in this industry for over 20 years, managing everything from high-end resorts to business-class hotels. The way people are treated depends entirely on their status, on their wealth, their appearance, their connections. The system doesn't care about who you are or what you've done. It cares about the image you project." Emily listened intently, sensing that Claire's words weren't just observations. They were truths that had cost her something. She had paid a price for speaking out against the system, and Emily knew that Claire's perspective was more valuable than ever. "But that's not all," Claire continued, her voice dropping slightly. "It's not just about who's allowed to stay. It's about who's allowed to be seen. The staff, the housekeepers, the people who clean up after the guests, they're invisible. Even the management who doesn't play the game, who doesn't conform to the standards, they get pushed aside. This industry is a machine, and it's built on exclusivity, not inclusion." Emily felt a chill run through her. Claire was speaking about the very same system that had rejected her so many times. She had known it, felt it, but hearing someone else confirm it made everything seem even more real, more urgent. The system was pervasive, and the people at the top were making billions off the backs of those who were treated as disposable. "How did you walk away from it?" Emily asked, her curiosity piqued. "How did you manage to leave when you knew how entrenched everything was?" Claire's eyes softened, and for a moment, there was a flicker of vulnerability. "It wasn't easy. I was at the top of my game, but I couldn't continue to be a part of something that was so fundamentally wrong. I tried to make changes from the inside, but every time I tried to push for better treatment, for more diversity, for fairness, I was shut down. The system is designed to protect the people at the top, and they'll do anything to keep it that way. The moment I realized I couldn't change things from within, I knew I had to leave." Emily sat in silence for a moment, letting Claire's words settle in. The weight of the industry's corruption had been laid bare before her, but hearing it from someone who had been inside, someone who had tried and failed to make change, made it all the more real. It wasn't just about the guests. It was about an entire ecosystem that prioritized profits over people, appearances over merit. She took a deep breath, determined not to let the heaviness of Claire's experience deter her. If anything, it fueled her more. "I'm glad you spoke out," Emily said quietly. "I'm not sure I could have walked away like you did, but that's exactly why I need to keep pushing. It's not just about making a documentary anymore. It's about starting a movement, about showing people that they don't have to settle for being invisible. The people who work in these hotels, they're not disposable. The guests who get turned away, they matter. We can change this." Claire studied her for a moment, as though weighing the sincerity of her words. Finally, she nodded. "I think you're right, but it's going to be a long, hard road. People don't change overnight. And the ones who have the power, who control these hotels, they won't give up their position without a fight. They'll push back, make you feel like your efforts are useless, like it's all just a big spectacle. Don't let them get to you." Emily nodded. "I won't." For the first time since the project began, Emily felt the enormity of what she was trying to achieve. This wasn't just a fight against a few bad actors in the hospitality industry. It was a fight against a system that had been in place for decades. A system that had normalized discrimination, exclusion, and invisibility. But with Claire's insight, Emily understood more clearly what she had to do. She needed to bring this fight to the people who had been silenced for too long. The workers, the unseen, the ignored. They were the ones who would make a difference. As they continued talking, Emily realized that she needed to broaden her approach. It wasn't enough to just expose the discrimination. She needed to empower those who had been part of the system but had never been heard. Claire had done it by walking away, but Emily knew she couldn't just leave. She had to stay, disrupt, and force change from within the very heart of the industry. As they wrapped up their conversation, Claire handed Emily a small envelope. "I want you to have this," Claire said, her voice soft but firm. "It's a list of contacts, people who can help. They might be able to get you in touch with others who've been affected, people who are ready to speak out but haven't had the courage yet." Emily took the envelope with a sense of gratitude, feeling like she had just received a map to a much larger world of truth. These contacts could be the key to building the coalition she needed to bring about change. It was time to expand the project, to make it bigger than just one person's fight. "Thank you," Emily said, her voice thick with emotion. This could change everything." Claire smiled, the ghost of her former self showing through. "You've got what it takes to make it happen. Just don't let them silence you." As Emily left the cafe, the weight of her mission felt both heavier and lighter. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Emily felt like she wasn't walking it alone. With the knowledge Claire had given her, and the contacts she had shared, Emily could see the next steps clearly. It wasn't just about exposing the truth anymore. It was about creating a network of people who could help each other, stand up together, and finally take down the system that had been designed to keep them all in the shadows. Emily's phone buzzed with a new message as she sat in her small apartment, the weight of the past few weeks heavy on her shoulders. The progress had been slow, painstaking at times, but it was starting to feel like something was finally coming together. She had gathered evidence, made connections, and begun to build a network of allies. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. This was bigger than that. It was about giving a voice to those who had never been heard, and showing the world how deeply the hospitality industry's biases ran. The message on her phone was from Marcus. "I have news. It's time. Let's meet tomorrow." This could be the breakthrough we've been waiting for. A shiver ran down Emily's spine as she read the text. She had been waiting for a moment like this, waiting for the right moment to push the project into the spotlight. But now that it was finally here, the reality of it hit her hard. This wasn't just another hotel visit, another interview, or another piece of footage. This was the moment where everything could change, where she could take her findings and expose them to the world. But what would it cost? She closed her eyes for a moment, collecting her thoughts. There was no turning back now. The project had grown beyond her initial scope. She had to keep pushing, keep exposing the truth. But the deeper she got, the more she realized that the stakes were higher than ever. The next day, Emily met Marcus in the same coffee shop where they had first discussed the project. He was waiting for her, his usual enthusiasm tempered by a sense of urgency. As she sat down across from him, he wasted no time. "I've been in touch with a few key people," Marcus said, his voice low. "We've got a meeting lined up with a journalist from a major national outlet. They want to run an exclusive on your project. Everything we've uncovered. All of it. This could be the platform we need to take the story mainstream." Emily felt her heart race. A national platform. This was the opportunity she had been working toward, the chance to finally get the story out in the open. But the weight of the decision was overwhelming. She had known this moment would come, but now that it was here, the implications felt much bigger than she had anticipated. This wasn't just about exposing the bias in the hospitality industry. It was about bringing down a system that had been operating unchecked for decades. "How do we know they're on our side?" Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper. Marcus met her gaze, his expression serious. "I've vetted them. They're interested in the truth, and they're ready to dig deep. But we need to be careful. If this goes public, it'll change everything. The industry will fight back, there will be backlash. Are you ready for that?" Emily nodded, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. The backlash was inevitable. People with power would never give it up without a fight. But she couldn't let fear stop her now. This was the moment she had been waiting for. "I'm ready," she said, her voice firm. "We can't hide from the truth anymore. We have to expose it, no matter what." The following week, Emily found herself in a bustling newsroom, the hum of journalists typing away at their desks filling the air. The magnitude of what she was about to do was beginning to settle in. This wasn't just another interview or another piece of footage. It was the beginning of a new chapter. The journalist she was meeting with, Jessica Marlowe, was known for her investigative work, her sharp eye for detail, and her ability to hold powerful people accountable. If anyone could get the story out in a way that would make a real impact, it was her. Emily had already prepared herself for this moment. She had reviewed all the footage, the interviews, and the documents. She had made sure everything was organized, every detail accounted for. But standing in the newsroom, the weight of it all was overwhelming. The people around her were busy with their own stories, unaware of the monumental decision she was about to make. She had come here to expose the truth, but exposing it meant exposing herself, too. She wasn't just a filmmaker anymore. She was a whistleblower, and the risks were far higher than she had initially realized. When Jessica entered the room, Emily stood up to greet her. Jessica was exactly what Emily had imagined. Confident, focused, and direct. Her sharp features matched the intensity in her eyes, and she extended a hand firmly as they shook. "Emily, it's a pleasure to meet you," Jessica said, her voice calm but businesslike. "I've read about your project, and I'm impressed with the work you've done so far. But we both know this story goes deeper than just a few bad apples in the hotel industry. You're up against a system." Emily nodded, taking a deep breath. "That's exactly why I'm here. I've spent months documenting the discrimination in the industry, the way people are turned away not because of who they are, but because of how they look. And I want the world to know what's really going on." Jessica motioned for her to sit, and they both took a seat at the table. The air in the room felt charged, as if everyone in the newsroom was waiting for something big to unfold. Emily could feel the weight of the moment. She had the chance to make a real difference, to expose the system that had perpetuated this injustice for so long. But what would it cost? The backlash was inevitable. Powerful people with vested interests in keeping things the way they were would fight back. Emily knew that, but for the first time she felt ready to face it head-on. "I've seen it firsthand," Emily continued, her voice steady. "I've been rejected at hotels, ignored by staff, and made to feel invisible simply because of how I looked. The system is built on exclusion, and the worst part is it's all hidden behind the idea of standards. These standards aren't about quality. They're about keeping people like me and my mother out of sight." Jessica's expression softened, and she leaned forward. "I understand, but this is bigger than just one person's story. This is about the people who've been working in these places for years, the ones who've never been given a voice. They're the ones we need to hear from." Emily nodded. She had heard their stories, the stories of workers who had been silenced, their contributions ignored. It was time to give them a voice. I've spoken to housekeepers, bellhops, managers, people who've seen the system up close, Emily said, her eyes focused on Jessica. I want to show the world that this isn't just a problem in one hotel or one city. This is everywhere. It's the whole industry. Jessica smiled slightly. You're right. This story could be bigger than we've even realized. But you need to understand, once we go public with this, there's no turning back. There will be people who try to discredit you, to undermine your work. Are you prepared for that? I'm prepared, Emily said without hesitation. This isn't about me anymore. It's about the people who've been silenced, the ones who've been made invisible. I'm not turning back. Jessica nodded. Then let's do this. We'll start by reaching out to the people you've spoken to, getting their stories. This is going to take time, but we'll make sure the world hears what's been going on. As the meeting came to an end, Emily felt a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in a long time. The path ahead wasn't going to be easy, but it was clear now. She wasn't just documenting the problem anymore. She was actively working to change it. With Jessica's help, she had the platform she needed to take her findings public. She would expose the system, and together, they would make sure that the voices of those who had been silenced would finally be heard. The day the article was published, Emily felt a strange mix of anxiety and triumph. She sat in front of her laptop, watching the comments and shares flood in as the world began to respond to the story she had worked so hard to expose. The headline was bold, attention-grabbing, "Behind the Velvet Rope: How Discrimination in Luxury Hotels is Systemic and Invisible." The article, written by Jessica Marlowe, was the culmination of months of investigation and countless hours spent compiling evidence. The narrative was clear. The hospitality industry, a sector that prided itself on offering luxury, had been built on exclusion, on turning away guests not based on their qualifications or financial status, but based on the way they looked. For Emily, it felt like a moment of reckoning. She had started this project as an attempt to prove a simple truth: that people were being judged unfairly in the hospitality industry based on appearance. But what had begun as an exploration of bias had evolved into a full-scale exposé of an industry that thrived on exclusion and inequality. Now it was out there was no taking it back. She stared at the screen, her thoughts racing. The feedback was coming in fast. Some praised her for her bravery, while others questioned the accuracy of the article or suggested she had misinterpreted the situation. She knew there would be critics. There always were when powerful institutions were exposed for their wrongdoings, but this was different. This wasn't just about her story anymore. It was about the voices of the workers and the guests who had been silenced for far too long. Her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "It's getting a lot of attention. We need to be ready for the fallout. There's no turning back now." Emily took a deep breath. She knew Marcus was right. The spotlight was on her now, and with that spotlight came not just support, but scrutiny. The industry would fight back. The question was how hard they would push and who would be caught in the crossfire. She opened her email, the subject line of one message catching her eye. It was from an anonymous source. The message simply read, "They're watching. Be careful." Emily's pulse quickened. It was an unsettling message, one that carried an ominous weight, but she didn't have time to dwell on it. The article had gone viral, and already people were calling for change. This was the moment she had worked for, the tipping point where the truth was out in the open and the pressure on the industry had never been higher. Her phone rang, snapping her back to the present. It was Jessica. "Emily, the response has been overwhelming," Jessica said without preamble. "We've had several calls from other news outlets wanting to cover this, and even some industry insiders are starting to reach out. The hotel chains are scrambling. They've already started damage control." Emily nodded, though Jessica couldn't see it. "I knew they'd try to cover it up," she said, her voice steady. "They've been doing it for years, but now they don't have a choice. This is bigger than their PR teams can fix." Jessica paused. "They're going to try and discredit you, Emily. They'll do everything they can to paint you as someone with an agenda, to say your project was just an isolated incident. We have to be prepared for that." Emily's fingers drummed on the desk, the tension mounting. "I've been preparing for that from the beginning." Let them try. I'll fight back. You need to be careful, Jessica warned. It's not just the backlash from the hotels you have to worry about. There are powerful people behind those companies, and they don't take kindly to being exposed. The weight of Jessica's words settled in. Emily had known this from the start, but hearing it now made the stakes feel even higher. She wasn't just taking on a few bad actors. She was challenging an entire industry, one with deep pockets and a vested interest in keeping things the way they were. The road ahead would be treacherous, and Emily knew she would need to be smarter, more strategic than ever. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of certainty. This was what she had been working for. She wasn't just exposing a few bad practices. She was tearing down the walls of a system built on inequality. As the days went on, the storm of attention only grew. The article had been picked up by major media outlets, and the world was now watching. News anchors discussed the exposé in prime time. Social media buzzed with conversations about systemic bias in the hospitality industry, and industry leaders scrambled to put out fires. Emily had always known that this would be the outcome. Her work had set the stage for a confrontation, but the reality of it, the sheer scale of the response, was overwhelming. Everywhere she went, Emily was met with a mixture of praise and caution. Her inbox was flooded with messages from journalists, activists, and workers in the industry. Some offered their support, while others questioned her motives or suggested she had left out critical details. The reactions ranged from applause for her bravery to threats veiled in polite corporate language. Her phone rang again, breaking through the noise of her thoughts. It was Marcus, and his tone was more urgent than usual. "Emily, I just got off the phone with someone in the industry," Marcus said quickly. "They're planning to file a lawsuit. It's happening faster than we expected. They're not just going after the article, they're going after you personally." Emily's stomach tightened. She had been expecting something like this, but hearing it out loud made it real. A lawsuit. They were trying to shut her down before she could do more damage. It was the next logical step for an industry accustomed to keeping its secrets buried, and Emily had no doubt they would throw everything they had at her. "What's the angle?" Emily asked, her voice calm despite the anxiety creeping in. "They're going to say the article was misleading, that it misrepresented the facts. They'll claim that you've painted the entire industry with a broad brush. The usual defense. The same playbook every corporation uses when they're caught red-handed." Emily clenched her jaw. She had expected this kind of backlash, but hearing it brought a stark realization. The fight was no longer just about exposing the truth. It was about protecting herself, too. They weren't going to make this easy. The hospitality industry would not go down without a fight. "We need to be ready for this," Emily said, her voice steady, though inside, her heart was pounding. "Make sure we have all our evidence lined up. We need to show them that this isn't just a few isolated incidents. This is systemic. I've got our legal team on it. I'll start preparing a defense," Marcus replied, his voice calm but resolute. "But we need to think beyond just defending the article. This is the moment where you can turn the tide. If we're going to win, we need to stay on the offensive." Emily felt the weight of his words. She had been documenting the problem for months, but now she was part of the story, too. She wasn't just the messenger anymore. She was the one under attack. The stakes were higher than ever. "I'm not backing down," she said, the fire in her voice returning. "This is just the beginning." As she hung up, Emily sat back in her chair, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. This was no longer just a project. This was a battle not just for her, but for every person who had been silenced by a system that valued appearance over merit, status over dignity. She opened the folder on her desk, scanning through her notes, the evidence she had gathered, the stories of people who had been turned away, ignored, or mistreated because of their appearance. Every story was a reminder of why she couldn't stop now. Every face, every name was a testament to the work she had ahead of her. Emily knew that the industry would fight tooth and nail to protect its reputation. But she also knew that the truth was on her side. She wasn't going to let them rewrite the narrative. She was going to finish what she had started. The next few days were a blur of frantic phone calls, meetings with her legal team, and preparation for the coming media storm. Emily kept her focus, knowing that the road ahead would be difficult, but also knowing that this was her moment to make a real difference. She had been given a platform, and she wasn't about to let it slip through her fingers. The morning of the hearing arrived with an air of finality. Emily stood in front of the courthouse, her eyes focused on the entrance as a sense of determination settled into her chest. This was the moment that would define everything she had been fighting for. The hearing wasn't just about the article or even the lawsuit, it was about something much bigger. It was about giving people the power to challenge a system that had oppressed them for so long. She had spent months documenting the unfairness, the biases, the rejection, and now she was about to take it head-on, in front of the very people who had built and perpetuated the system. Her lawyer, a sharp and experienced woman named Clara, was standing next to her, her expression focused but calm. "Are you ready?" Clara asked, though the question was more of a reassurance than an inquiry. Emily nodded, her heart pounding in her chest, but her resolve unwavering. She had prepared for this moment for months, knowing it would come to this, knowing that the fight wasn't just about exposing the truth. It was about taking on the establishment that had protected itself for far too long. "Let's do it," Emily replied, her voice steady, despite the storm of emotions swirling within her. The world had been watching since the exposé was published, and now it was time for the final act. She wasn't just here to defend her work. She was here to defend the people who had been invisible for too long. Inside the courthouse, the tension was palpable. Lawyers, media, and spectators were milling around, the buzz of quiet conversations filling the air. Emily caught sight of several executives from the hospitality industry sitting in the back. She recognized a few of their faces from her earlier encounters. People who had been part of the system, benefiting from it, maintaining its secrecy. They were here to see if she would crumble under the pressure or if she would keep pushing, determined to hold them accountable. Clara led Emily into the courtroom, and the moment they stepped inside, a hush fell over the room. The judge, a middle-aged man with a stern face, called the court to order, and Emily took a seat at the plaintiff's table, her back straight, her hands clasped in front of her. She could feel the weight of the eyes on her, the media, the industry representatives, the judge. But none of that mattered. She had come this far, and there was no turning back now. The proceedings began with opening statements. The lawyer representing the hotel industry rose first, presenting their argument with practiced ease. "Your Honor, this lawsuit is a matter of defamation. Ms. Harrison has made unfounded claims about the hospitality industry, painting an entire sector with broad strokes based on a few isolated incidents. The article in question is misleading, and the claims about widespread discrimination are exaggerated. These are baseless accusations, and they must be addressed as such." Emily could feel her stomach churn as the lawyer spoke, but she refused to let it shake her. She had heard this rhetoric before, arguments that attempted to downplay the significance of the problem, to dismiss the reality of discrimination. She wasn't going to let it go unchallenged. When it was her turn to speak, Emily stood up slowly, her heart pounding but her resolve unwavering. She addressed the court with clarity, her voice strong and confident. "Your Honor, this case is not about defamation. It's about exposing a broken system, one that has systematically ignored the voices of people who've been turned away, rejected, and marginalized simply because of their appearance. This is not about isolated incidents. This is a systemic problem that affects thousands, if not millions, of people across this country." Emily glanced over at the gallery, where a few of her allies were sitting, workers who had shared their stories with her, individuals who had been treated like invisible cogs in the hospitality machine. She could see their quiet encouragement, their trust in her. This wasn't just about one story. This was about all of them. "This article and the work I've done," Emily continued, "isn't about tearing down an industry. It's about holding it accountable for the harm it has caused. It's about making sure that people who have been made invisible are finally seen." The silence that followed her words felt deafening. She could sense the weight of the room, the pause that hung in the air before the judge spoke again. "Thank you, Ms. Harrison," the judge said, his voice neutral but steady. "We will now proceed with the presentation of evidence. The court session continued, and Emily felt the tension building as both sides presented their evidence. The defense's argument was methodical, but Emily remained focused on the task at hand. They showed clips of some of the interviews she had conducted, carefully selected moments that made it seem like the incidents of discrimination were rare or exaggerated. They also introduced testimonies from some high-ranking executives, each one attempting to downplay the scale of the problem she had uncovered. But Emily was prepared. She had anticipated their defense, and she wasn't going to let them rewrite the narrative. Her team, including her lawyer Clara, had worked tirelessly to ensure the truth couldn't be manipulated. As the defense's witnesses finished their testimony, it was time for Emily's team to present their evidence. Solid, irrefutable proof of the pervasive bias in the hospitality industry. Clara stood, signaling that it was their turn. She addressed the court confidently. "Your Honor, we've heard the defense's arguments. But now, we'll present evidence that not only supports Ms. Harrison's claims but proves that what she documented is a systemic issue that goes far beyond isolated incidents. We will show you the video footage of these rejections, the personal testimonies, and the patterns that have existed in this industry for decades." The room was still as Clara called for the first video clip to be played. It was a moment captured during Emily's initial interviews, footage of a hotel receptionist coldly dismissing a guest who didn't meet the standards of the hotel's appearance, despite the fact that the guest had a valid reservation and the means to pay. The clip showed the receptionist's dismissive tone, the subtle way the guest was ignored, and how quickly the staff moved to assist someone else. As the video played, Emily noticed a few heads nodding in recognition. Some of the jurors, even the judge, seemed moved by the undeniable cruelty in the exchange. The silence in the courtroom was telling. The evidence was speaking for itself. Next came the testimonies of workers, housekeepers, maintenance staff, and bellhops, who spoke about their experiences working in these luxury hotels. They described the invisible lines that divided the staff from the guests, how they were often treated as less than human despite doing the most demanding work, and how the management maintained a culture that ignored the humanity of those who kept the hotels running. Emily listened intently, her heart heavy with the words of these workers. These were the stories she had been trying to amplify all along, the voices of those who had never been given a chance to share their pain. As the last testimony was heard, Clara turned to Emily, her eyes filled with quiet encouragement. The judge called for a short recess, and Emily stood up to stretch, feeling the weight of the trial pressing on her. Marcus, who had been quietly watching from the back, made his way toward her. "You're doing great," he said, his voice calm but full of pride. "The evidence is on your side. The truth is on your side." Emily nodded, but her mind was racing. This was the moment of reckoning, the one where everything would come to a head. She couldn't afford to let the defense's tactics distract her now. As they returned to the courtroom, the judge called for final statements. The defense's lawyer stood up, attempting one last push to dismiss the case. "Your Honor," the defense lawyer began, "the evidence presented by the plaintiffs is biased and one-sided. These incidents were isolated cases, and Ms. Harrison's findings do not represent the broader industry. Her personal experience should not be used to indict an entire sector that provides jobs for millions." But Emily was ready. She stood up slowly, her voice steady, unwavering. "Your Honor, I did not set out to tear down an industry. I set out to uncover the truth. The industry's reputation is built on the invisible labor of people who are never acknowledged. I'm not asking for personal vindication. I'm asking for a system that treats people with dignity and respect. What I've shown is not an isolated incident, but the result of a culture that has been allowed to thrive unchecked for too long." As her words echoed through the courtroom, Emily could feel the gravity of the moment settle over her. This wasn't just a case anymore. This was a fight for accountability, for justice. She wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for the countless others who had been left in the shadows, invisible to the world. The judge nodded, a solemn expression on his face. "Thank you, Ms. Harrison. We will now adjourn for deliberation." As Emily left the courthouse that day, her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. There was no way of knowing how the case would turn out, But one thing was certain. Her work had already made a difference. The truth had been exposed, the system had been challenged, and the conversation about systemic discrimination in the hospitality industry was no longer something people could ignore. No matter what happened next, Emily knew that the fight was far from over. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. This was just the beginning of a much larger movement, and she would be at the forefront, pushing for change, demanding justice, and ensuring that no one was ever left invisible again.